Hello and welcome to Daniel and Revelation Prophetic Bible Study. We are on session 7 today. We are going to study Daniel chapter 4. If you are watching this series for the very first time, I would encourage you to go back to session 1, 2, 3, all the sessions until you catch up with the previous background. So today we are going to study chapter 4. And here we are going to see Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He ruled approximately 605 BC until approximately 562 BC. He is considered the greatest king of Babylonian Empire and is credited with the construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, so one of the ancient wonders of the world. So Nebuchadnezzar is mentioned by name around 90 times in the book, in the Bible. So it's a remarkable character. So Nebuchadnezzar served as a God's instrument of judgment on Judah for its idolatry, unfaithfulness, and disobedience. You know, sometimes people will say, why did God let Nebuchadnezzar go and destroy Judah, the chosen people? But sometimes, when the people are disobedient, God will use even the rulers, those who are not evil rulers, for executing his judgment. But I want to remind you that God is not the author of the evil. God did not create Nebuchadnezzar to be evil, or God did not encourage Nebuchadnezzar to do anything, but he used Nebuchadnezzar as he is to execute his judgment upon Judah because Judah was unfaithful. So we studied this in the background sessions in session 1 and 2. Talking about a human heart, one of the universal traits of human nature is the unwillingness to listen to warnings, right? So sometimes, how many times we see this, again and again, the warnings will be given, but, people try to disobey those warnings. So one of the universal traits of human nature is the unwillingness of to listen to the warnings. Bible actually says that clearly in Jeremiah 17 verse 9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So prophet Jeremiah already recorded this about a human heart. Even we may not know it, but God knows about our human heart. And he clearly said that it is desperately wicked and who can know it? So because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. I think I alluded to this passage earlier. So in Romans, God mentioned about this, about a human heart. How the people rejected God. They knew God, but they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So we studied that in Romans. So professing to be wise, they became fools. Sometimes people say they have all the knowledge, they have all the wisdom, but the way they do that in God's eyes is they act as fools, and change the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. So we studied this earlier, so I just want to recap about the condition of a human heart that will help us to understand the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. So the Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, this is not the first time we are seeing the Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So he had a dream in chapter 2. So he wanted some interpretation. If you remember, he didn't even tell the dream to his counselors. He demanded that they would tell the dream and also they would interpret the dream in chapter 2. So that's why we are calling this as Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. Daniel chapter 4 gives the second dream. So Daniel chapter 4 is one of the most unique chapters in the Old Testament because it is an official autobiographical document. In other words, it is an open letter penned by King Nebuchadnezzar and sent throughout his entire kingdom, a copy of which is tucked inside Daniel's inspired record. So this was, as I alluded earlier, so this particular chapter was written by Nebuchadnezzar himself, and as a proclamation of what happened to him, and this was sent around to all the nations at the time wherever he was ruling. So a copy of that letter, Daniel being the prime minister of that nation at the time, so he had this copy of this letter, king's letter, which is an autobiographical document, if you will. So he included that as part of his the book of Daniel. So that's how we got this. So that's why we see this. It is written by Nebuchadnezzar himself. So the way the letter went out and proclaiming what happened to him is something like the President of the United States coming on the national TV on a prime time and giving his testimony, like something happened to him, a dramatic, life-changing situation in his life, something like telling everybody. So it is kind of that kind of an impact, sending a letter to all the nations at the time. Chapter 4, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied to you. So he is writing the letter to all these nations. So all the people, all the languages. So he is sending this letter to all the people. So typically the way it works is there are a lot of scribes in the king's court. So we see this in the book of Esther. So when there was a proclamation, the letter was translated in fact into other languages and sent to all the nations. So I think same here. So Nebuchadnezzar's letter was sent to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. When we talk about in all the earth in these ancient records, it was that time it's the known world. So whatever the kingdoms, like we talked about the war in Carchemish, the Assyrian kingdom that was taken over by Nebuchadnezzar, and then he defeated Egypt in the same battle, and he took the Judah made him a vassal king. So if you look at the maps that I showed you earlier, so pretty much he occupied the whole land. So there is no opposition at this time for him. So that is why we see this kind of word to say that to all the people, all the nations, in all the earth. So the verse 2. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. So who is this I? It's Nebuchadnezzar. He is writing, right? So I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. And I want to again remind you, this particular chapter is written in Aramaic, and it's not in Hebrew. So in chapter 2, verse 4, we saw the deviation or the diversion from Hebrew to Aramaic. So from that time, we are still in Aramaic until chapter 7. So this whole chapter is written in Aramaic. So I thought it good. So King Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. Before we go any further, I just want to mention one more thing. There are some scholars that believe that this is not the Nebuchadnezzar we talked about in chapter 2, but I do not buy that argument, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Some people think that this is Nabonidus, the king that comes after Nebuchadnezzar. But the way it was written, the way it was described, everything, many scholars point to this is the same Nebuchadnezzar that we talked in chapter 2. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that because you may come across that kind of an discussion. So I just want to bring it to your attention. So I don't think this is Nabonidus. This is Nebuchadnezzar 2. So the same Nebuchadnezzar that we talked about in chapter 2. And the same Nebuchadnezzar who brought this Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the captivity. So anyway, Daniel chapter 4. So this incident must have taken place no later than 34th year, around 571 BC of his 43-year reign. So his reign, we know it is between 605 and 562 BC. So we know clearly from the records that was available that Nebuchadnezzar reigned between 605 and 562 BC. And this happened around 34th year. So that gives the timeline. It must have happened around 571 BC. Probably about 30 years had transpired between the events of chapter 3 and those recorded here. So you remember chapter 3, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Last week we studied that. So from that chapter to this chapter, there was some gap of 30 years. Nothing was recorded by Daniel. So some years have passed by. So you need to keep that in mind when we study this chapter. So Nebuchadnezzar probably was towards the end of his life. 7 years he is going to be exiled, and then 1 year after that, so around 8 years. So if you count backwards 8 years, that's the timeline we are looking at right now. So I'm going to explain the 7 years period when we get to the particular verse. So anyway, so we are going to look at that. This is around towards the end. Here Daniel would now have been about 50 years of age. So remember, Daniel was a teenager, around 15, 16 years age when he was brought to Babylon from Judah. So now he would be around like 50 years of age at this point. So the purpose of the letter is to set forth in verse 2, namely to tell of the greatness and power of the Most High. So we just read verse 2. So this letter is to tell the greatness and the power of the Most High God, the God of Israel, that has been exhibited in Nebuchadnezzar's life. So this is really a great event that happened in Nebuchadnezzar, and he do not want to hold any longer. So he want to tell that what happened to him. So that is why he is talking about this Most High God and sending it out as a letter to all the nations. So verse 3, how great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. So before he actually gives the dream, we came into this chapter trying to understand the second dream of Nebuchadnezzar, but before he writes his second dream, he is just praising the God of the Israel and how he helped him in all this. So he is praising, the first few verses is basically exalting the God of Israel. At last Nebuchadnezzar had come to realize that Yahweh, the God of Israel, not himself or the gods of Babylon, was sovereign. So the king was now an old man and must have been acutely aware that soon death would bring to an end to his life and thereby to his reign. Yet he acknowledged that Yahweh's reign or the kingdom is eternal and endures from generation to generation. So he is aware that he is going to die sometime soon, but he is saying that God's kingdom is eternal and God's kingdom is from generation to generation. So that is what he is explaining here. So he realized that now. So far probably he did not, but now he is very clear in understanding the sovereign God, and that's why he is writing it. Yahweh's kingdom is eternal and endures from generation to generation. So verse 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. So typically that is the setting that we come into this chapter. So Nebuchadnezzar conquered all these places and there was no opposition. So whenever you look at a kingdom, when there is no opposition, when there is no war, so usually the kingdom is at peace. People will be in a relaxed mode. If there is a war going on, so everybody will be in a kind of a distressed situation because somebody is fighting the war and anything could happen. So this is a time there is so much of peace in his kingdom. So Nebuchadnezzar was at rest. He don't have to fight any wars right now, and he is flourishing in his palace. So the king was experiencing peace and prosperity on every side like a flourishing tree. So the word that was mentioned in verse 4 is like a flourishing tree, that is describing his kingdom. His opposition, including the Egyptians. We talked about Pharaoh Necho in session 1 and session 2, remember? So including the Egyptians, now his opposition is all subdued. He made all of them as vassal kings, and there was no serious threat to his authority. So that is the situation right now to his kingdom. So verse 5, I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. So this is very clear. He is writing that he was afraid. He's saying this is something terrible. He could realize something terrible, and he was afraid. So I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. So that is his condition at this when he got the dream. Suddenly, the king's carefree life was shattered by this strange dream, right? So just in the previous verse, we saw that there was so much peace. He was flourishing like a tree. And what happens now? Suddenly, the king's carefree life was shattered by a strange dream. The contrast between verse 4 and 5 is dramatic. Here we can see that, right? So in the verse 4, it is all about peace, flourishing tree, and now here is terrified. As a matter of fact, the contents of this dream terrified the mighty Nebuchadnezzar. So this is a dream that really shook him to his core. In verse 6, therefore I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So just like as usual, whenever he had a dream, he sends out a decree, right? Bring in all the people, bring in all the wise men of Babylon. So we want to know the meaning of this dream. But one good thing here is this time he is telling the dream, he is asking for the interpretation, unlike in the previous case. So just the typical way, verse 7, then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers came in. So, this bunch of people, they're ready to come in whenever king asks for them. But they did not make known to me its interpretation. So king is writing this letter now. He's explaining, he's making all these people like useless, right? And telling everybody, this bunch of people, like, the magicians, astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, they came in. But I told them the dream. Here he is saying, I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. So it's kind of like, you don't want to be in the group of people when this letter is going out to all the nations, right? So, he's just making them like useless fellows. They are no good. So, but then, verse 8, but at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, and he explains the dream. So just let me make a point here. So some people think that Daniel was not dealing with the day-to-day affairs. He is now the chief of all these people. Remember in chapter 2, Daniel was promoted and he was made the chief of all these magicians and all this group of people. So probably when king sent out this order to bring in all the magicians, all these people, maybe Daniel wanted to let them go and then see what they could do, and then he could come and explain it. So that's one way you could interpret. The other way is because king always is in a haste, like, whenever he wants, he immediately summons people to come, and probably Daniel was not immediately available at the time when king summoned. Sometimes the timing also God ordains, so the events that takes place, God ordains. So whatever it may be, we don't know the reason because it was not written why Daniel did not come in the first group on the first time. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar. So it is interesting how King Nebuchadnezzar is using his Hebrew name. But at last Daniel came before me. He's writing Daniel, his Hebrew name. But if you keep reading this whole chapter, he interchangeably uses, sometimes he calls him Daniel, sometimes he calls him Belteshazzar. So either way, but he always calls the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names. But for Daniel, I don't know why he calls him by his Hebrew name, but then this letter is going everywhere and people may not even know Daniel because they know by the Babylonian official name. So that's why he's writing, wherever he writes, he says that his name is Belteshazzar. So don't get confused with the Belshazzar in chapter 5. Next week or the week after, we are going to study about another king whose name is Belshazzar. So this is the Belteshazzar. This is the name given to Daniel according to the name of my God, that is Nebuchadnezzar's God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. So he clearly says that in him is the spirit of the holy God, and Nebuchadnezzar trusted him so much because he could tell. So even though all the other people could not interpret the dream, but he knows that Daniel could help him. So no explanation is offered for his late arrival, but Daniel may have deliberately delayed his coming in order to give these pagan wise men an opportunity to prove their inability before Yahweh. It might also have been that Daniel, as a leader of the wise men, only considered matters the others could not manage. So, because Daniel is now the head of all this group of people, so he may want to consider the matters the others could not manage. So it may be either way. He did not show up in the first time. In verse 9, Belteshazzar chief of the magicians. You see now again he is calling Belteshazzar instead of Daniel, so he's switching back and forth. So in the previous verse he called him Daniel and then explained Belteshazzar, and in this verse he is saying Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians. In Aramaic it actually Rab Hartom. So it's like, when we talk about magicians, it's like we always think about a magician who do perform some tricks. That's not the idea here. So the chief of the magicians is something like, towards the idea that he is a wise man, chief of all the wise men. So that's the meaning that comes here. So he is Belteshazzar, chief of the wise men, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. Explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. So when Daniel comes in, Nebuchadnezzar tells him the dream, and he is confident that Daniel could do that. Because if you read it, it says that because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you. So Nebuchadnezzar could see clearly that the spirit of the holy God is in Daniel, and he could help him. Verse 10. These were the visions of my head while on my bed. So now he is explaining what this dream is all about. So these were the visions of my head while on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. A tree in the midst of the earth. Get the picture? So in the midst of the earth, a big tree, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. I don't know why everything is a great height. Last week we studied about a great image of 90 feet, right? And here is a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. So get the picture. So here is a big tree, and its height is too high. Whenever you talk about it reached the heaven, it doesn't mean it's like it's going up to heaven. It means it's just way too high. Something like a skyscraper or something like, it's a very too high. So, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. So here is a picture I found about a tree that's showing, that's a really big tree. I don't know if you can see at the bottom of the tree like an ant and that white snow. That's a person standing there. So with a red shirt or a red coat on it, on him. So that's like a tiny dot. So that's a person. So think about it now with that compared with the height of this tree. It's a humongous tree here. So if you zoom that on the tree, so there are people hanging on the tree and climbing on the tree. So you can see at least I see some 3 people with an yellow jacket and an orange and a green. So there are the people. So my point is there are some trees really big. So anyway, so I just want to show, I was interested in looking at what's the biggest tree or whatever. I found this tree. So going back to the text, so verse 12. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So this tree is really big tree, and it is its fruit abundant, leaves lovely. It is really a very good description of the tree, right? So that is what it is happening here. And the birds of the heavens were dwelt in it, and all the flesh, that means all the people, were fed from it. So it's a one kind of a good big tree. The tree here represents Nebuchadnezzar primarily, and also his kingdom of Babylon. So the king and the kingdom are inseparable. So sometimes you can see that kind of language, it talks about the king and the kingdom, so it's inseparable. So the tree here represents Nebuchadnezzar. You may ask, how do you know that? So we'll see. So let's continue reading. In verse 13, I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher. So because this is written in Aramaic, this particular word, ayr, in Aramaic is a description of a watcher. And also the meaning is like a guardian angel. So if it was written in Hebrew, you could have seen this word used in several other places. but because it is written in Aramaic, and I told you that Aramaic is only used in limited portions in the Bible, like Daniel. There are only a few handful of chapters. So this word is not used too much in the Bible because it is written in Aramaic. But either way, the meaning of that is it's like a guardian angel, a messenger, a holy one coming down from heaven. So clearly, this is represents an angel from God. So I saw in my visions, and there was a watcher. The word watcher is used especially in this sense, that these guardian angels keep an eye on us, keep an eye on the people. So it represents something like a guardian angel always watches over the people, a holy one coming down from heaven. So these watchers see all, hear all, and tell all. Many people think they can live in a secret. So many people think that whatever they do, nobody is watching, right? Many people think that they can live in secret, that they are not under the eye of God. We talk about wanting to enjoy our privacy, but if you want to know the truth, you and I haven't any privacy. We cannot get away from God no matter where we go. So I just want to remind us that we cannot run away from God. So there is no privacy for us, especially in that kind of understanding when God is always watching over us. So psalmist in the Bible, in Psalm 139, clearly makes that case. He says that in Psalm 139:7, where can I go from your spirit? He's asking a rhetorical question. So where can I go from your spirit? The answer always is no. You cannot go from anywhere. So that's usually Bible uses this rhetorical questions to answer something. So that's what here the psalmist writes in Psalm 139. Verse 7, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend up into heaven, you are there. Right? If you go, maybe, wherever you want to go, maybe take a spaceship or whatever, even if you go there, he answers that you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. So in other words, even if you go down in the deeps of the water or wherever you go in deep, how far even you may take a submarine and go down, but still it says that God is there. So that is his point. And if I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me. So he's just making his case strong. So he's explaining wherever he goes, so God's presence is there. In verse 11 in Psalm 139, if I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. So sometimes people think, oh, let me turn off all the lights and nobody will see me or whatever. So if you walk in darkness, so darkness is not darkness to God. So that is what he is saying. So indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. So the darkness and the light are both alike to you. So for God, it is not. So for our human eye, we cannot see when we walk in darkness. But for God, the darkness is like the day. So he can see through the night. So that is what his point is. So in other words, you cannot go from anywhere from God. So that is what he is making in Psalm 139. Going back to Daniel chapter 4, verse 14. He cried aloud and said thus. Who is that crying aloud? So the watcher. Remember, we're talking about the watcher. A watcher came down from heaven. So an angel came down from heaven. And verse 14, he cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. I think that is why king was afraid. So he had this beautiful picture of this lovely tree with all the branches, the fruit and all that. And now you see this angel coming down and said, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. It's something like a judgment, something like a punishment. So he could realize something bad is happening here. So that's why he was afraid in the first place. So the message was, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches. So everything is scattered. Animals, the beasts, everything is scattered from it. So the tree is cut down. So it's kind of a judgment we see here. In verse 15, nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth. So sometimes when you cut down the tree, you leave the stump, so you need a stump grinder to come and take the stump out. So here the message is like, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. So why do you do that? You need to protect this stump so that it will not be destroyed. So the message is, you cut down the tree, but do not take away the stump and its roots. We need that stump and the roots, so that's why it's protected with the band of iron and the bronze, a protection, a hedge of protection around this stump. In the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven. So now if you cut down the tree, all the leaves are gone. Now what happens when it snows, when there is a dew, so that becomes wet, the stump becomes wet. So let it be wet with the dew of heaven. So you got the picture? So that is what's happening here. And let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. What? It just changed from it to him. So far we studied this, let it be wet. We are talking about a tree. Let it be wet with the dew of the heaven. And now what is it saying? And let him, who is him? So that means that it has changed now to him. So that it is talking about, this tree is about a man, a person. And let him graze with the beasts and on the grass of the earth. So the language is very clear. So far we are talking about it, and all that kind of language, talking about the tree. And now here in this verse 15, it changes the words, and now it is talking about him. It's talking about a person. And let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. So this is really a terrific judgment, so let him graze. So you see the stump here, I found a picture to show you, so what it might have looked like, that gives you an idea. So the whole big tree is now cut down, so there is no tree, but you have this stump on this tender grass. That's what it says. So now if there is a dew, if there is snow, so it will become wet and all that. So now this is the picture of the but all of a sudden it becomes a him. And now it continues in verse 16. It says, let his heart, so it's no more it, it's now his heart, let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. So this judgment is really terrible. So now you see, this tree is just an illusion of something much bigger. So it is talking about a person. So now this verse is making it very clear. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. So when you come across the word times, it could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be months, it could be years. So whenever you come across a generic word times, you need to look in the context and have to come up with what the time frame they are talking about here. So based on the context, based on all this whole thing, the narration, so I'm saving you trouble trying to figure out what this times means. I'm giving you the answer. It is years. So scholars usually think, based on all the events that happened, so let 7 years pass over him. So in other words, it's talking about 7 years. So let me read one more time, because this is very crucial for us to understand this chapter. So far we talked about about the tree. And here we see, let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. And in 17, this decision is by the decree of the watchers. You remember King Nebuchadnezzar always passes decrees, pass a decree to bring all the wise men, pass a decree to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace. Now a decree comes from heaven to him. So this decision is by the decree of the watchers. Now the watchers, the angels, the holy angels, passes a decision by the decree of the watchers. And the sentence by the word of the holy ones is what? In order that the living may know, so that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives to it whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. In other words, the heaven, the angels, the watchers are passing a decree, and the reason for that is let the whole world know that there is God in heaven. So this message is to send a powerful message to the whole world that there is a living God, that there is a God who will set up a person if he chooses to give him a kingdom, or if he want to take him and remove his kingdom. So that is the message here we see it, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know, that is that the people may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. So especially right now, with less than around 20 days to go for the presidential elections, so don't get worry about too much. It's the Most High rules in the kingdom of man. He gives it to whomever he will and sets over it to the lowest man if he desires. If he want to give it to a person, if he want to bring a judgment upon the nation, he chooses somebody. If he want to give something else, he chooses a person. So we may try to fight, who's going to win? This person winning or this person losing. We may try to do all that, but it is God who rules the kingdom of man. So he has the control. He can set up somebody, he can take away somebody else. So this message is very clear. So let us understand this. The decree of the watchers and the sentence by the word of the holy ones is in that order, that the living may know, that the people may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. So we sometimes forget, and then we worry too much. So don't worry too much, because the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. But we could pray to God, we could ask God for his help, we could delay the judgment, we could do all those things. But ultimately, it is God who sets up somebody. Just like he raised up Nebuchadnezzar, just like he gave the power to Pharaoh in the Egypt, in Exodus, you read that. And just like he raised up Cyrus, another king. So the point I'm trying to make is, if God chooses somebody, he can just raise up somebody and he can set them over the affairs of the man. So we don't have to worry too much on that. So in verse 18, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. So he has given the dream, and now he is asking Belteshazzar to explain its meaning. Now you, Belteshazzar, declares its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able. How can he know that? Because chapter 2 behind us, right? So in chapter 2, he explained even the dream. So the king is very confident. That's why he's saying, but you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. I think this is a catchphrase you can see again and again. He just keeps saying the same thing about Daniel. The Spirit of the Holy God is in you, because he was really astonished. Do you remember, if we read in chapter 2, after Daniel explained the dream and the interpretation, king fell down before him and worshipped him. So he just thought about him as a deity, like as a god. So that is the same thing he's still carrying on, talking of whenever he talks about Daniel. But you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. So that's what he's saying. All my magicians, all other people could not do it, but I know you can do it. So in verse 19, then Daniel, see now again he's talking about the other Hebrew name. So although king is writing, so he is switching names back and forth. So then Daniel, and then for those who read Daniel, so he has to tell them, it is Belteshazzar I'm talking about. So he writes again the same name. So then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, so here, the moment Daniel heard this dream, Daniel was stunned by this dream. So he couldn't even imagine that this could happen. And he was astonished for a time. So probably he took some time before even he spoke a word. King realized what's going on with Daniel. So Daniel was terrified even with just hearing the dream. So king is saying to him now, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. So immediately, so this Daniel was terrified by just listening to this dream. He could not even imagine this dream. and he don't even know how to explain the meaning to the king, so he was terrified. But king has given him permission. Belshazzar, don't worry, do not let the dream or the interpretation trouble you, but tell me the answer, or tell me the interpretation. So the Belshazzar started explaining to the king. He said, yeah, finally I got this wicked king. So he came to Judah and destroyed our people. He did all these bad things. Now God is taking revenge on him. He didn't even had that kind of attitude. In fact, we see this Daniel loved this monarch. He really understood that it is God who set him at this place. And now he is showing his care. He is showing his compassion towards this king. So the way he explains is, before he explains the dream, he is giving is, my Lord, may the dream concern those who hate you. It should not be for you. It should be for the enemies. It should not be for you. But I can't help. It is now for you. My Lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. And then he keeps going with the interpretation. Verse 20, the tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely. And he repeats the whole dream that Nebuchadnezzar has mentioned. This is with a style that we saw in this book of Daniel. So they repeat everything, whatever has happened. So he now explains the whole thing. So just the repetition of the dream. So the tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens and could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in which branches the birds of the heaven had their home. So this is talking about the tree. So the tree, it is you, O king. So immediately it should have shook King Nebuchadnezzar. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. For your greatness have grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. So everybody knew about Nebuchadnezzar because he rules almost all the known kingdoms at the time. So now he says, the tree is you. It is you, O king. This kinds of ring a bell with another verse in the Bible, so I just thought of putting that here. When King David sinned with Bathsheba, and then God sent prophet Nathan to confront him, and there comes and Nathan explained a story, and then finally, David thought it is about somebody and said he passed on some judgment, and immediately Nathan turned around and said to David, you are the man. So it is a kind of Daniel saying to the king, you are the king, you are the tree. So it's kind of same kind of analogy, if you will. Verse 23, and then inasmuch as the king saw the watcher, the Holy One, let's call this watcher an angel from now on. A king saw the angel, a Holy One, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. So inasmuch as the king saw the Holy One coming down, so he's explaining that what the meaning of this is, that to chop down the tree and destroy it. So let it be wet and with the dew of the heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. So here is the interpretation. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon the Lord my king. So now he interprets this verse. What does that mean, to chop off the tree, right? So that is what he's going to explain in verse 25. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat like grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and the 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of man and gives it to whomever he chooses. Wow, this is really a terrible judgment to pass on anyone, right? So, he's clearly saying that you are the tree, you will be cut down, and here the meaning of that is you will be driven out, and you will become like an animal eating grass. Think about that. A king with all the power, or king of, he's called the king of kings in other passages, because now he had all these other kingdoms in his control. And now you are talking about this king as what? Like an animal eating grass? And that is the judgment here. So he explains, so they shall wet you with the dew of the heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you. So it looks like it's 7 years till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of man and gives it to whomever he chooses. So here it is very clear that King Nebuchadnezzar did not realize or give honor to the God of heaven. You know, there are a lot of events that happened. As soon as he became king, right, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. We read that in chapter 2. So from that time he had this dream, and Daniel interpreted the dream, and he knew that there is a God in heaven who could reveal truths and reveal dreams, and he understood the power of this God. And then we saw in chapter 3, he threw these men in the fiery furnace, and there God rescued them. So he saw the power of God again there. But in spite of all that, king did not humble himself. He still held on to his pagan gods. He still continued to worship his pagan gods. And now here comes the judgment. So the judgment is that he is going to be cut off. He'll be driven out of the palace. So here is a picture. Somebody drew it, acting like an animal. So I kind of did some research about symptoms, what happened here. So this is called clinical lycanthropy. So if you look for this in the university libraries or something, so you can find this. You can find this as the Journal of Neurobehavioral Sciences. They had found some of these cases like this. The lycanthropy, the word actually from Latin word for wolf. You know, the werewolf stories and all that, you know, children's books we have. Sometimes we read it. So it is a kind of that clinical lycanthropy. But the one that King Nebuchadnezzar got is not this lycanthropy, but it is something called bioanthropy, that is like an ox. He actually behaved like an ox, like eating grass or a buffalo. So that is what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. This affected individuals reported delusional belief that they are in the process of transforming into an animal or have already transformed into an animal. So that is what a clinical lycanthropy is. So if any person gets this is a rare kind of a disease, but if the person gets this kind of a disease, they think that they are an animal, and or they are in the process of transforming into an animal or have already transformed into an animal. So this is what a clinical lycanthropy is. It has been linked with the altered states of mind that accompany psychosis, the reality bending mental state that typically involves delusions and hallucinations, with the transformation only seeming to happen in the mind and the behavior of the affected person. I think that is what King Nebuchadnezzar got. So his mind was, you remember the verses clearly, his mind was changed, his heart was changed. Whenever you read the word heart, it's the mind, like, you know, his functions, his abilities was transformed to that of an animal. So that's what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. It's called clinical lycanthropy. So because I had a lot of other stuff to go through, why this happened to him, and what is the main reason. I want to address what is the main reason why this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. And I don't have time to do that today, so we will continue in next week's session. So next week we'll continue this. So the reasons behind, the main reason behind this judgment on King Nebuchadnezzar. So I want all of you to join next week. So thank you for watching. So please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.